Welcome on this December 14th, 1995, to the second in our interviews with the Reverend Dr. Harold L. Mitton, former principal and professor of Acadia Divinity College. My name is Bob Wilson. Dr. Mitton, in our first two interviews, we have discussed your early life and some educational things and philosophy of ministry a bit. I wonder if in this interview we can center very much into those pastoral ministry experiences which were yours. So can we begin then with your early pastoral ministries, and maybe we'll just go through them one by one with some breaks along the way for some more questions. So why don't you begin then with your full-time pastoral ministries?
I was graduated with the Bachelor of Divinity degree in 1946. I had thought at one time of going on to Yale Divinity School for a Master of Sacred Theology. But in the final months of my B.D. work, a classmate, George Allen, who had been at Aylesford, became ill, and he asked me if I would finish out the term for him. So I went to Aylesford, and subsequently, following graduation from the School of Theology, I decided perhaps I was brain weary after years of study that I should settle down, and so I accepted a call to the Aylesford pastorate. In those days, this was a three-point charge, really: Aylesford and a community called Millville, and Morristown, which is the center of the fruit belt for the Annapolis Valley. It was a wonderful way for one to begin one's ministry. The people were very responsive and very kind. These were the post-war years, and people were flocking back to churches in those days. The Aylesford Church had to have an extension, and we completely renovated the church in Morristown. And we certainly enjoyed our years on the Aylesford pastorate. I should explain that I was ordained in Aylesford, and Dr. Patterson was the guest preacher. It was a very memorable night in that about an hour before the service was to take place, there was a very great uproar in the community because of a fierce thunderstorm. All the lights went out, and so we were plunged into darkness in the church. We had to haul in a piano, and the lights came on halfway through my being ordained, that is, hands being laid upon me. And Dr. Patterson, with his usual witticism, said to me afterwards, he said, "Harold, I hope that your ministry, having begun in darkness, will emerge in light." But Aylesford was memorable in that our son Ronald was born at that time, and we loved the Aylesford people. We were there for 4 years, and then I moved along to Windsor. I accepted a call to be the pastor in Windsor. It had a large congregation, people coming from various parts of Hants County. Once again, it was a three-point charge in a way. It was Windsor, and I went to a little church regularly in Martock, which is now, of course, famous for its ski hill. And I went out to 3 Mile Plains for a service in the afternoon. Very, very busy, but eventful years in Windsor. I played hockey on a church team in a church league, and some of the outstanding players in those days in the amateur ranks were members of the congregation, Chuck Smith and Harry Ettinger, and they used to love to feed me a pass so I could score an easy goal, which was the only kind I could score anyway. But I had many happy memories.
I wonder if I could ask a question in the midst of this. In that post-war period, someone has said we came as close to a revival in Atlantic Canada during those years as any time in this century. Why do you think that was happening just in that post-war era?
I suppose people had been unsettled, of course, by the Second World War, and people were searching for answers. They had spiritual hungers, that was very obvious. And the office of the pastor was highly respected in those days. They insisted on, the people in Aylesford and Morristown and Windsor and so on, insisted on calling us Mr. and Mrs. Mitton. They would never think of calling us Harold or Marguerite, I don't know why, even though we might have tried to encourage it. But there was an immense respect for the office of pastor, and a pastor was one of the leaders in the community. But getting back to your question, there were deep spiritual hungers, and people were, they came to church in goodly numbers in those days.
At what point does your mother-in-law come to live with you? Because that becomes a part of your life as well.
I've indicated that my mother-in-law was a widow, and when we came to Aylesford, we persuaded her to come to live with us. So she sold her farm in Heartland and came to be with us. A very fine Christian woman, and she became active in the church and was such a help to us in the parsonage. It freed me to concentrate on my work in the study. I began my ministry with the idea that I would spend my studies, my mornings rather, in the study, and afternoons in visitation, and the evenings, of course, for meetings of various kinds. And I poured my life into these duties or exercises, and it was Mrs. Wright, Marguerite's mother, who helped a great deal in relieving pressures in the parsonage by helping her daughter with entertaining and domestic work and so on. And so I salute her memory.
The ministry that you had in Aylesford and Windsor were very effective, and they still tell stories of those ministries. Anything else you want to tell us about those before we go on to the next?
I don't. It would take more time than we have in this interview to go into details. In 1955, however, I received a call to come as pastor of the Baptist Church in Charlottetown, and I was there for 7 years, from 1955 to 62. And once again, these were exciting days for the church. We outgrew the church building in which we were in, and a new edifice had to be constructed, and later a new parsonage. And I regard my years on Prince Edward Island as among the happiest in my life. The people, again, respected the office of the pastor, and there was a gracious response to my ministry there. And the family enjoyed living on Prince Edward Island. Sometimes on a summer afternoon I would knock off a bit early and take the family on a picnic to the North Shore, either to Stanhope or Brackley, and it was a very happy time in our lives.
At this point, you haven't told us about Ruth's entry into your family. You told us about Ron, but
yes,
could you tell us about Ruth as well?
Yes, a big event took place when we were in Charlottetown. We had been looking for the opportunity of adopting a child, and after years we were told by the social services in Halifax that a girl was available, and so we made arrangements to adopt her, calling her Ruth Christine, and she brought a great deal of joy and happiness into our lives when we were in Charlottetown.
I was just remembering that the first time I remember seeing you was in the Charlottetown Church, because our gospel team from the college or choir had gone there to sing, and Bob Scranton was my roommate, so we had those kinds of connections in those days. They built a new church in Charlottetown while you were there.
Yes.
That was a major undertaking. I think it's an interesting story how that came about. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Well, it is a very exciting story. We had outgrown the church building in which we had been worshiping, and at a business meeting, one of the laymen stood. His name was Nelson Good, and he said, "I think we need to build a new edifice." And so the congregation, he made the motion, seconded, and we decided to build diagonally across the street from where the older church was situated. That involved purchasing a large property, the demolition of a 3 or 4 story house, and it was, you might say, a exercise of faith, an operation of great magnitude, and I don't think we would have gotten off the ground at all were it not for the kindness of Captain Carl Burke, who was the owner of the Maritime Central Airways. And when it looked as if the whole thing would stall, he asked me to meet with him, and he said to me, "Harold, Florence and I," that was his wife, "would like to pay for the cost of the lot and the demolition of the building." And after that, of course, we never looked back. We engaged B.D. Stevens, and that's a story in itself, to supervise the erection of the edifice. But it was a very challenging time for the congregation at Charlottetown.
May I follow up with just one further question? In the series of interviews that we've been doing, almost everyone has mentioned B.D. Stevens. Would you tell us a little bit about your experience with this very remarkable layman?
Yes, B.D. Stevens was a fun-loving man. It was a joy to be with him, and he had a great vision of church extension, and he offered to put the resources of his construction company at the disposal of congregations who wanted to erect new edifices. And we were very happy to have him come and help to erect the church in Charlottetown. But he was an outstanding layman, and as I said, the kind of a person you like to be around. His fund of stories was limitless, and he was very, very, very gracious Christian gentleman.
After Charlottetown, you were called to the blessed province of New Brunswick.
Yes, I accepted a call to Brunswick Street Baptist Church, following a very scholarly pastor by the name of Dr. William Elgie, for whom I had and still have an enormous regard. He was integrity personified, and he had been there 16 years, I believe, and with some fear and trepidation, I followed in his shoes. And once again, I appreciated so much the reception and the response of the people. I was there for nearly 8 years, and it was a challenging time. The 60s, Bob, were turbulent times. All institutions were under attack, and yet the church grew, and we had good representation from the university community. But they were turbulent days and challenging days, and it was a demanding time to be a pastor. But we enjoyed our Brunswick Street days. It was the home of my mother. She had been born in Marysville, as I said earlier, and it was, of course, the home of the University of New Brunswick, my wife's alma mater, and Marguerite's mother was near her people, so it was a very happy time for the family to be in Fredericton.
Now, your children were growing up at that point in time. Was
Yes.
Ron about ready to go to university by then?
Yes, I had baptized Ron, and it was a great joy for me in Charlottetown. When we came to Fredericton, yes, he was finishing, I think, grade 10 and 11 before going on to UNB for his freshman year. He enjoyed Brunswick Street Church because it had a gymnasium, and he honed his basketball skills and later became a varsity basketball player. Ruth became active too in Brunswick Street, singing in a girls' choir, participating in the handbell choir, and so on. So it was an enriching time for my family.
And then the decision came to leave again. How did you come to go all the way to Calgary, to First Baptist there?
Well, at the toward the close of my pastoral ministry in Brunswick Street, I received a call, or at least a summons to Calgary. And I felt uneasy about it, but I did consent to an interview. They flew me out. They wanted to be sure that I might be able to cope with what was then considered to be the largest Baptist church in Canada, and whether I would agree with the job description. And it involved, I don't know, Bob, I've always found decisions difficult. And guidance doesn't come easily to me, divine guidance, but it comes in time. And ultimately I decided that I would accept the call to go to Calgary. Although I distinctly remember when I arrived in that burgeoning city, asking myself the question, why am I here? The church is a huge church, the church building. One side of it runs all the way along one entire block, and thousands of cars pass the church building every day. It's diagonally across from Central Park, and in the distance there's the famed Husky Tower. It's a downtown city church, and it was a very, very challenging time. The Jesus movement was at its height when I was pastor there, and we had a ministry among young people. Some of our own young people established a coffee house ministry, and they would later fan out on the 8th Avenue Mall to talk to young people who were gathering there from all over the country. And some of these did make commitments to Christ, but Bob, it presented me with difficult problems. They came pouring into the church, especially in the Sunday evening service, 150 or 200 of these young people freshly committed to Christ. They had little patience with organ music. They wanted guitars and contemporary lyrics. They didn't really know how to behave in church. They came in T-shirts. And so this First Baptist Church was a rather sedate congregation, made up largely of business people, professional people. And they looked askance, some of them, at what was happening. But we managed to survive. We had five members on the ministerial staff. And together we were able to evolve a service of worship which held that mighty disparate congregation together. But it was difficult, and I believe it's still difficult for some pastors today to conduct a type of worship which is meaningful to traditionalists and to young people who seem to be impatient with formal liturgy and want everything to be spontaneous.
During those years of ministry in the various churches, you you had opportunities to minister in a variety of ways, on radio and doing some various teaching ministries. Do you want to enlarge on those just a bit so that we can see some of the breadth of your ministry?
I never worked so hard in my life as in First Baptist Church, Calgary. I was responsible for preaching Sunday morning and Sunday evening, as well as an hour of exegesis on Wednesday night. And in the latter part of my ministry, I had a radio broadcast on the most popular station in Calgary, CHQR. These radio broadcasts were of a short duration, 15 minutes, and they were pre-recorded in our own studio in the church. The program was called Heart to Heart, and the idea was to convey the Christian message in non-theological terms. And Bob, if you've ever tried to do that, that's tough. And but each Sunday night I would try to do that. And the audience was beamed at people who were coming home from Banff, skiers in their automobiles, that they might be listening in to station CHQR. But it was a busy time. But I had great assistance on the part of other members of the staff.
I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your involvement in denominational structures, convention when you were in this area, and then when you went to the West, some involvement there. And I know you've also had opportunities as conference speakers, that sort of thing.
Before I get into that, could I just pause and express my views on ecumenism?
Sure.
Throughout my ministry, I sought interdenominational cooperation, and in all the communities I was active in the ministerial association and interchurch activities. And for instance, when I was in Charlottetown, I cooperated with Sister Mary Henry of the Roman Catholic Family Service Bureau, and together we campaigned for a better situation in the jails, and we sometimes would go on the air together to condemn slum landlords. This involved us in quite a bit of controversy, but I think it was a good thing. And when I left Charlottetown, Sister Mary Henry had been hospitalized, but she sent another member of her order with a painting of the West River. And it's a painting that I've always cherished. And if Sister Mary Henry is not in heaven, I don't know of anybody who will be, because she loved Jesus Christ. She used to tune in to our broadcast from Charlottetown pulpit. And when I went to Calgary, the church was, main emphasis was on evangelism. And every service in the First Baptist Church culminates with a hymn of invitation. And people come forward either to transfer membership or to make a first-time commitment to Christ, or maybe a recommitment. And so it was a great joy at the Sunday service to see people respond. But it was interesting not only in evangelism, but also in social concerns. I was co-opted as a member of the City Council Committee on Juvenile Delinquency, and later became president of Interfaith, which organization addressed low-cost housing, situations of poverty, and so on. And so some of my best experiences in the Christian life have occurred trans-denominationally. I've met some wonderful Christian people in various denominations, and so I guess throughout my ministry I have believed with Stanley Jones that everyone who belongs to Christ belongs to everyone who belongs to Christ.
Now, in your long years of service, you were president of this convention and held a number of other positions, and I think you were active in Canadian Council of Churches at one point, so I'm interested in those experiences and what they brought to you.
I don't know whether I can recall all that I did in that connection. To begin with, I had an arrangement with all the congregations I served that I would be away for 1 week a year on evangelistic preaching missions. And so I assisted pastors in practically every city or large community in the Atlantic provinces. Denominationally, as you have suggested, I became president at one time of convention. I was a member of the Canadian Foreign Mission Board, as it was called in those days, chairman of the Home Mission Department of Convention. I was vice president of the Canadian Baptist Federation. I was being groomed to be president, but when I moved to the West, because of a rotation system, I wasn't able to follow through on that. I became associated with a movement called Faith at Work,
right,
which, and I became a field representative for them at times. So all in all, I was involved in church renewal conferences, but I don't want to sound as if I was in so many activities that I neglected my local church.
If I could just very briefly follow up on one thing, your focus that you made in terms of your pulpit ministry, did you keep that schedule of study, visitation meetings throughout your whole ministry?
Pretty well. I would devote mornings to study, afternoons, and I'm going to get onto this a little later in the interview, for visitation. Yes, pretty well.
As we come to the end of this interview, what was happening in your family at this point in time? Because you'd moved to Calgary. What about Ron and Ruth?
Well, Ronald had gone on from UNB to Acadia, and from Acadia went to Dalhousie Law School. So he was absent from our home when we were in Calgary. Ruth had graduated from high school and had gone on to the University of Calgary, doing 2 years in their School of Education.
Well, Dr. Mitton, time has flown again, and we've come to the end of our third interview. We'd like to thank you very much for being with us and sharing with us what God has done in your life. Thank you very much.
Thank you.